I'm joined by the president of the World Bank. That's Dr. Jim Yong Kim. Many thanks for joining me on the Global Conversation.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
Now, we've just received the news from the ECB, the long-awaited news from the European Central Bank on quantitative easing. Can I have your take on that? Is this good news for Europe?
I think it is, and Mario Draghi and the ECB signaled this pretty far in advance. We sort of knew the shape of it, and frankly, I don't think there was much choice in the matter. I mean, what we've seen is that quantitative easing and these tools that we didn't even know would work prior to the financial crisis that started 6 years ago now. But now we know that this is a tool and it should be used because the potential to have a self-fulfilling and continuous deflationary cycle was very real. The other part of it, the other half of this, is that this, though, still is not enough to really solve the problem. The countries that are in the most trouble really have to move forward with their reform agendas.
Which countries do you have in mind in particular?
Well, I mean, of course, Greece, and then also Italy, Spain, Portugal. There are still many things that need to be done to put them back on the path to growth. And what we'd like to see is them saying, what an opportunity. We have historically low oil prices. Now we have quantitative easing. This is now the time to really jump in and make the reforms that we know we've had to make all along. That's what we hope to see. Whether we see that or not, I'm not sure.
Would you say that this package, this stimulus package, is more aggressive than you were expecting?
I think it's about what we expected. It's about what we expected. I mean, we had been getting signals, and of course, this is what often happens, that you want to communicate what you're going to do well ahead of time. That's just what he did, and so I don't think too many people were very surprised.
Now, the World Bank's forecast for Europe, growth forecast, was just a little over 1%. Do you think that's going to have an impact on that?
Well, we hope it increases it, but as we said, this has to be accompanied by the other necessary actions, the structural reforms. So if we see both of them in the context of historically low oil prices, when Europe is mostly oil importing, it could be a very good time for Europe, but without the aggressive action on the reforms, again, I worry.
So the World Economic Forum has also pointed out that one of the biggest risks to global stability and therefore the economies is international conflict. And if we look to Russia, that is obviously one of the factors that they're taking in mind. How has that impacted your forecast for Europe?
Well, it's one of the greatest drags, of course, on global growth. I mean, we've seen different estimates, and some as high as a 5% contraction in this year for the Russian economy. That's a very serious problem. And also the conflict with Ukraine. So we're watching Ukraine very carefully. We've invested a lot of money into Ukraine, and we know that we need to do what we need to do. We need to do whatever it takes to make sure that that Ukraine is able to survive and continue. The situation there is very worrisome, and we actually don't know the scale of it. So we're working very closely with the IMF. We're gonna be ready to help as needed. But there are now some major economies that are really affected by the low oil prices. Russia's one, but we're very concerned about Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela also is supporting Cuba, Haiti, Honduras, other countries, and so everyone will be affected. Nigeria, of course, is in a very difficult situation with the low oil prices.
Well, we'll look to Africa a little later on. I just want to stick with the situation in Europe for the moment, because the World Bank, basically, one of your goals is the alleviation of poverty. And I guess your focus is turning increasingly to Europe as more and more people fall into that poverty trap. What stimulus are you bringing to Europe? What help are you bringing there? You've mentioned Ukraine, but what else?
We've done some work in Greece. We don't, of course, provide lending to Greece, but we've been providing technical assistance to Greece. So our work is mostly on in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, but all of those countries are being affected. So, for example, there are many countries in that region that are deeply affected by remittances that have just lost value because of the devaluation of the ruble. That entire area is one of great concern, but probably, there's no question Ukraine's at the top of my list.
So we did ask our online audience to send us in questions. We received a lot of those, a lot of focused on Europe. We received this question from Luis Miguel Munoz, and it's an eternal question on austerity. And he asks, do you think that the policy of austerity and cuts imposed on countries of the Eurozone is an obstacle to economic growth?
Well, what we've known, and IMF has stated their opinion on this, and that responsible spending for any government is really, really important. But if you do it to the point where you're really hindering growth, then it's problematic. Now, getting that balance right, that's not straightforward. It's very, very difficult to know what that balance is. I think terms like austerity versus growth, it's too simplistic. I mean, the countries that are smarter in the way that they spend their public budgets are going to be better off in the long run. But at the same time, you've got to think about which investments that you need to make. So in each country, it's different. Taking a position on austerity versus growth strategy is just way too simplistic to understand the complexity of what's happening right now in Europe.
Okay, well, let's take a slightly simplistic approach on this, though, just for 1 second. If you were to be a European living in a European country, which country would it be and why?
Which country would it be? Well, right now, the country that's clearly, the two countries that are doing the best are the United Kingdom and Germany. I speak the language in the UK much better than I speak German, so it would probably be the UK. But I have great admiration for Chancellor Merkel's role in really keeping the Eurozone alive and beating. And we spend a lot of time speaking with her, and her insights on all the difficulties in the region, I think, are really very, very powerful.
Well, there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, because we've also got a 300 billion euro investment by the European Commission. It's only got a 21 billion euro seed fund. Do you think that it will work with such a small amount of initial funding into it, or will it require some sort of miracle?
Well, the getting out of a potential deflationary cycle and getting back on the path of growth is going to require many things at the same time. I mean, I think the point that many people here at the World Economic Forum are making, and that I would make as well, is that every single country has to really look at their own policies and then move. I mean, there's a singular monetary policy, but there's not a singular fiscal policy, and I don't see any future that would lead us quickly and easily to a single fiscal policy, a body that would determine fiscal policy for all the European countries. That's part of the difficulty of Europe, but it's also it's also the very challenge that leaders are facing. So I would live anywhere, and in here there are many, many beautiful countries in terms of actual living, but we are all very, very worried about the next few months and the next year.
At the beginning of this interview, we were talking about oil prices. I've got a very specific question on that issue. There's obviously big winners and losers on this, but the World Bank has said that the environment could be a winner. That's something that is difficult to equate, isn't it? Because green energy does tend to be more expensive. So how can green energy be a winner in this scenario?
Well, one of the most important influences, and and something that we could take care of right away, is fossil fuel subsidies. So fossil fuel subsidies are around $500 billion a year spent on that. And we've done research that shows that the wealthiest 20% of populations who are living in countries with fuel subsidies gain 6 times the benefit from fuel subsidies as the poorest 20%. So it's actually a regressive tax. And so what we're saying is, now with the low energy prices, now is the time to remove those fuel subsidies. What will happen is less carbon will go up in the air, and by recouping those the cost of those fuel subsidies, they're going to create fiscal space and create and rebuild those buffers that they need. Now, it's true that that the low oil prices could have an impact on renewable energy. There's no question about that. But what I'm hoping is that in 2015, the year of the meeting in Paris, COP21, that the ambition around renewable energy will increase. And in some places it's really happening. For instance, in India, Prime Minister Modi has quintupled their aspirations for solar energy, and they're now talking about 100,000 gigawatts.
There's a lot of issues we want to discuss. I'm going to shift focus now to Africa and the Ebola crisis, because I know that's something that's very close to your heart. The outlook for the three worst hit countries, obviously Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea. How does it look for 2015?
Well, the situation in Liberia is much better. There's not been a new case now for quite some time. Sierra Leone is still struggling. Guinea is doing better, but there's still cases in Guinea. The thing that we have to remember is that each of the three epidemics started with a single case. So until each of the three countries gets to zero and stays at zero for a prescribed period of time, we're not going to be out of the woods. So we still have a lot of work to do. These three economies that are very small to begin with are going to lose, our estimate is around $1.6 billion. So it's a big impact on these three countries. But the real question for us, and especially here at the World Economic Forum, is how are we going to protect the global economy from shocks like this? But, you know, in fact, Ebola is relatively slow-moving.
So what lessons have we learned?
Right. One of the lessons we've learned is that the world pays a lot of attention in the middle of an epidemic and then forgets about it. And that's what led to the current situation with Ebola. That after the last flu outbreak, H1N1, we said we're going to make all these changes to be prepared next time, and we just dropped it. So what we're doing now with the other multilateral development banks, with the UN, with private sector, is to say we're going to now finally do it.
So that brings me to a question from Moskoy Junior Moskovich, and he asks, how much money has the World Bank already spent on Ebola? And I'd like to add, how much have you earmarked for 2015?
So the total expenditure for the entire World Bank group is pretty close to $1 billion. So about half of that is for support of the government, and about half of that is the support of the private sector. We think these two aspects of it are really important. People need jobs. People need to get back to work. And so we've been providing much-needed capital to banks through the private sector wing, and we've also been supporting the governments.
And the regional impact for the countries that are kind of surrounding those three worst-hit countries, are they going to see a long-term economic impact from this? Well,
the good news is that the impact is going to be relatively small. So the three countries that were hit, Senegal, Nigeria, and Mali, each mounted a heroic, an enormous, heroic, expensive, and ultimately effective response, so that each of those three have gotten to zero after the first cases entered their countries.
And so if we just look at your tenure as World Bank President, you're halfway through. What would you say, in a nutshell, are your big achievements, and what do you want to achieve for the rest of your time in office?
You know, many people, when I took the job, asked me about the relevance of the World Bank Group. And in talking to many people inside and outside the World Bank, what I realized is that, especially for the big middle-income countries, it's not our money that they're interested in, it's our knowledge. So we've gone through a huge restructuring of the World Bank Group to ensure that every single country gets the very best knowledge. And so both China and India have told us that they're going to pretty dramatically increase their borrowing from us. Again, not because they need our money, but because they want to work with us and have us bring knowledge. And here's what it means. For Prime Minister Modi, we put together a package for him in which we said, you have a problem. You have many public-private partnerships that are stuck. We're not going to just tell you that they're stuck and tell you to fix them. What we're going to do is to show you the 10 best examples in the world of countries and companies getting their public-private partnerships unstuck. And then we're going to bring those people, some of them are inside the bank, some of them are outside the bank. We're going to bring those people, and we're going to work with you to get your public-private partnerships unstuck. And so Prime Minister Modi came in, to the meeting, the first meeting with me, I suspect fairly suspicious of what we might be able to offer him. And as I was walking out the door, he tweeted, we don't need their money, but they're going to be our information bank.
And finally, one last question, and this is from another member of our online audience, Babakar Tiam, who says, will there ever be an African president of the World Bank? Because so far it does tend to be Americans.
Well, I was the first World Bank president who actually was involved in an election. So what had happened in every case before was that the United States put up a nominee, No one else put up a nominee, and they were, sort of elected by acclamation. This time I had to actually run. I traveled all over the world and made the case, and there was a real election, and I won the election. Now, every single election in the future, I think, will be contested, and I think it's very possible that that someday an African person will lead the World Bank.
President, many thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much.